Today we hear the voice of James. Paul has a sister. I confess I was astonished to discover that Saul has a sister, living, moreover, an easy walk north of me, in a house by the wall at the Tower Gate. A sister in Jerusalem. One should not be astonished to learn that any man born of family and bred in family has a family, but I was. At the same time, I took a private cheer in the knowledge it diminished the man somehow. The force of the man, his visible presence, to imagine attachments and encumbrances upon him. The fighter wasn't as light on his feet as he had seemed to be. And the fact that Saul had not, during his first 2 visits in Jerusalem, either mentioned her or, so far as I knew, had not gone to her. The fact that he had an attachment he wouldn't acknowledge, a secret to keep, perhaps something to hide, diminished him all the more. It was during his 3rd visit that he unwrapped the matter before me. He had a request, he said. After we 2 had debated, and after a remarkable display of weakness on his part, the man is prone to debilitating emotion. And after I had drawn the line, so to speak, that contained him, he meekly asked whether I might talk to this sister on his behalf. He explained, again full meekly, that they had not spoken together in more than 20 years. The separation was by mutual consent, for she was still as zealous for the God of Moses as he had been before he switched his allegiances. And would I myself be the one to go, he asked, since his sister despised believers in Jesus, but my reputation even among the Pharisees was honorable. I was James the Just, he said, James the Gate. By then, the Sicarii had begun to roam Jerusalem. So the Romans called those fiercest of Jews who concealed a thin knife, a sicca, in the fold of their robes, who, when they passed the unwary enemy, kill him with quick slits of the knife and then keep walking undetected, never breaking stride, while the dying man slumps down behind them. Those whom the Sicarii kill are temporizing Jews, rich, collusive Jews, whose hatred of Rome zealots consider neither passionate enough nor public enough. Though Saul had no wealth nor status, he seemed too much in love with Rome, and to go personally to his sister's house could be disastrous. Saul explained that her husband was violently zealous for the law, the purity of the temple, and the freedom of Jerusalem. He loathed those who cooperated with Rome, interpreting that allegiance as idolatrous. No Lord but God, he swore, with murderous intent. Saul told me he needed something from his sister, and would I, he asked in perfect, planned, articulate Aramaic, help him get it? During the single day of his brief sojourn in Jerusalem, Saul astonished me on 3 counts. This was the second. Not that he needed something from someone, but that he admitted the need, as well as his inability to fulfill the need. He needed something of her, and he needed me to get it. It was a small wooden diptych which his sister had received from their father. The diptych was a legal document. Its waxed surfaces preserved the certification and the signatures of witnesses to the fact that Saul is a Roman citizen. He had, he said, been arrested in Philippi. He had been beaten and imprisoned then. It was only after his suffering and God's intervention by means of an earthquake that the magistrates accepted his word that he was a citizen. But if he'd been carrying the proof upon his person, he might have avoided the rod and the shackles in the first place. Saul needed me, and I agreed. I went to the house of his sister. and discovered she had a son. Saul had a nephew also living in Jerusalem. His family was a family. A pretty young man opened the door to me, a rich red complexion and a violent shock of black hair. When I gave him my name and asked to see the woman, his mother, he left me at the door and disappeared. Saul's sister never appeared. A man did. A tall man with high cheekbones, an even brow, and a gray-eyed, smoky gaze. A man remarkably handsome, clearly the father of the youth and the husband, I supposed, of the household. He said nothing. I spoke without invitation. I made my request, Saul's request actually, naming Saul as his brother-in-law, while the tall man stared down at me with lidded scrutiny. When I was done, he said, "I've heard of you. I have no quarrel with you." I thanked him for the approval and apologized for the lack of his name. I wished I said to call the man by his name. He gave me no name. He simply stared down at me. So I repeated Saul's request with variations. The man said, "There is no such thing in my house." I said, "Perhaps your wife knows. Perhaps she has the written certificate, since she too lived in the family of Roman citizens." The man said, "There is, sir, no Roman thing in this house, living or dead. And if some Roman thing entered this house living, he would leave it dead. I would kill him with my own hands." He closed the door without farewell. In general, the man was a sign of the state of the city. Jerusalem was a nest of suspicion. Anger hummed in every house. But I had no doubt that in this house there existed a particular personal and murderous despising of Saul himself for reasons beyond my knowledge. When I returned to him, I told Saul that his sister knew nothing of the diptych and that it were best to avoid her family altogether. He nodded and probed no further into details. Let me also record my third astonishment during his brief visit, that Saul thought a leader of the Jerusalem church could exert leadership abroad. Not once in our discussion did I give outward expression to the series of amazements he produced in me. I've learned that by long necessity. I keep composure. But this was the deepest of the three. Saul asked me to control Barsabbas and other preachers in Galatia. What a remarkable concession to the reach of my authority, though I verily believe he had not thought it through. It came as a passionate utterance and an unstated premise. I, of course, could not, and therefore did not promise to, comply. If only it were true, though. If only Saul himself had a bone of obedience. If only there might be, by the leadership of one for all the churches, no dissension among the churches at all. If only we were everywhere united in the same mind and the same judgment. I offered Saul these sentiments before he departed. And I offered him, too, condolences on the grim refusal with which his family had met his request. He said, "My house is no earthly city."